This must be a really random video for most of you, but honestly I just love girly horror comedy so much that it had to come up on my channel at one point or another. Like, yes, I want to talk about K-pop and Sanrio and Barbie Fairytopia, but also, yes. So, I'm just hoping you enjoy the ride. Anyways, I have to warn you, I am a Lisa Frankenstein defender and ally, okay? I just want to make that very clear. So this video is just to convince everyone else as well that this is the greatest movie ever made. If you haven't seen this movie, this video will contain spoilers, but if you want to know what it's about before watching, Lisa Frankenstein is an amazing American comedy horror film released in February 2024, written by Diablo Cody and directed by Zelda Williams. The plot follows Lisa, a very traumatized teenage girl, in the apparently very colorful year of 1989. Why is she traumatized, you may ask? Well, just the usual. Her mom was killed by an axe murderer like 2 years earlier, while Lisa was in the house with her. Her father, the same character from Stranger Things, has since remarried Janet, a self-proclaimed intuitive person.
I always know. I'm an IP, intuitive person. Took a whole seminar about it.
And now Lisa also has a stepsister, Laffy Taffy. While Taffy encourages her to socialize and be more open, Lisa kind of lives in her own gothic world and spends her free time in an abandoned cemetery reading poems to her favorite Tombstone, a young man who died in 1837. One of my favorite parts about the film is the intro, where they briefly show you the man's life through animation. He was a pianist who had fallen in love with a woman that ended up leaving him for someone else. Then the young man died by a lightning strike, and that would have been the end for him if only another lightning hadn't struck his tombstone 152 years later, in 1989. The movie received quite a bunch of mixed reviews from critics, and I do kind of understand why. Like, it's not your typical blockbuster movie, and it's definitely not perfect, although to me it is, but that's how many cult classics are. I feel like you will really connect with this movie if you already love spooky cult classics, maybe 80s movies, absurd humor, and teenage romances. But I feel like the ones who truly understand this film to its core are people like me.
I'm weird. I'm a weirdo. I don't fit in, and I don't want to fit in.
Whose perfect romantic fantasy is to have a cute dead pale twink come back to life just for you.
Dead meat.
Like, tell me that's not the dream. Anyways, there will be spoilers from now on. Diablo Cody, the iconic writer, mentioned that Lisa Frankenstein is actually supposed to be set in the same fictional universe as her previous 2009 film Jennifer's Body, which is a comedy horror about a teenage girl who gets demonically possessed and also goes on a killing spree. Diablo Cody really likes seeing dead teenagers. That movie also got really mixed reviews at the time.
There was a time when it was painful for me to talk about Jennifer's Body because, you know, that movie was a commercial failure.
Yeah.
And like, I was savaged personally.
I feel like any movie that mixes horror and absurd humor is almost always difficult for the general public to digest. Like, do I think that a zombie cutting off a guy's pee tube to stitch it to himself is funny? Yeah. But is my 81-year-old Christian grandmother going to laugh? No, she probably just wants to watch The Notebook again, and that's totally fine. But I love me a comedy with odd tonal balance like Bottoms, Heathers, and Jennifer's Body, and I think Lisa Frankenstein is on that same level, but sadly really underrated. And so I have come here to make you finally see the truth. While the movie is a horror comedy and teenage romance, which can sometimes tend to be a little empty in their exploration of more profound themes, you know who wrote this one. So of course it's going to be layered like an ogre. Only 2 years after the brutal death of Lisa's mother, Lisa and her dad have learned to cope with their grief in two very opposite ways. She has made her life revolve around death, reading the poems of dead authors aloud to dead people. Instead of being scared of death, she now romanticizes it and brings people back to life in her head, like the young man from the Tombstone. You know when some people tend to assign human traits to inanimate objects and maybe talk to their Sylvania family collection because of that?
Escucha las palabras de las brujas, los secretos escondidos en la noche.
Not that I do it. Well, Lisa kind of does that, but in a cemetery with dead people. Meanwhile, her dad Dale seems completely over the death of his wife. As Taffy says, my mom met him 6 months after the murder and they got engaged and married real quick. Which is great, you know, because Dale didn't have to be sad for too long and Lisa had a new mom right away. Yeah, everything worked out nice. And while that's very sweet of Taffy, it shows the very warped ways in which grief can be seen by people who don't really understand it. Since the actor basically plays the same character as the passive dad in Stranger Things, the first instinct is to also just assume that he's gratuitously a bad dad. And he may be, but there's certain clues here and there that make me think that he's just very traumatized and dissociating the whole time. Like when the creature points at the sheet music on the piano and Lisa mentions,
"Oh no, that's sad. He hasn't played since my mom died."
Or when Dale looks at Lisa's very bloody nails and only sees the whiteout. The day after that weird green storm that only Lisa seems to have seen, the dad also says, "It was quite a storm. You see that ball of lightning? Big green ball in the sky?" Since that lightning is what revived the creature, I think Dale isn't as far removed from the concept of death as he thinks he is.
Hello, Lisa.
Taffy does end up understanding grief at the end of the movie with her boyfriend, her mother, and her stepsister all being dead. While we don't know exactly how she's dealing with it, we see her wear the rosary that Lisa gave her, and she seems kind of disturbed when Dale is so nonchalant about the whole thing. I recently read a comment on a Reddit post titled, "What did you think of Lisa Frankenstein?" that said this: "Feminist chick flick bullshit. I liked it until she uses the hot zombie to kill the nerd, just for meekly touching her breast at a party." Isn't it kind of crazy that some men just expose themselves like that on the internet? Like, they really do just say the craziest things. In the scene the user is referring to, Lisa has been drugged at a party without her consent, obviously. This random guy appears and makes her think that he's there to help her, but he sexually assaults her instead, first touching her boob and then taking her hand and placing it on his freaking P-tube while saying, "Come on, you can't stop what you've started, it's the rules." When Lisa says no and leaves, he continues, "Come on Lisa, just for a minute," and then she tries to walk away, stumbling down the hall because she can't even walk straight. Then, when Lisa and the creature kill that guy, I thought it was obvious that it's not okay to kill. Like, who watches that and thinks, yeah, I would have killed him too? It's clear that Lisa is not in her right mind. But for a watcher that maybe has had a similar experience, the fact that a hot zombie comes back to life, takes vengeance on behalf of the girl, and cuts the guy's hand off, I'm sorry, but in a morbid way, it's really funny. Still, I like the way that the assault scene was included in the film. Just because the protagonist is evil doesn't mean that bad things haven't happened to her. Life is nuanced like that, whether you like it or not. This is not a theme in the movie per se, but just something that the film leaves you with after you finish it. The characters who were seen as antagonists by Lisa were actually right about her. Janet, her stepmom, is clearly a narcissist who believes she's an empath. She has numerous confrontations with Lisa in which Janet is always portrayed as the villain and Lisa the victim. But ironically, she is intuitive. She knew Lisa wasn't in her right mind. Janet ends up getting killed, not exactly by Lisa, but Lisa doesn't show any remorse or worry, which is a sign of being kind of insane.
"Not until we bury the body."
Tamara, the goth girl, on the other hand,
Hi, Lisa.
knows there's something wrong with Lisa and tells the police that she saw her with the now dead handless guy. And while to Lisa that's extremely annoying, what Tamara does is obviously the right thing. And then there are the people who are nice to Lisa and believe her to be a good person, who are subtly proven wrong in the end, like Taffy and Michael Trent. Taffy and Michael seem to have a genuine connection, but Lisa decided that her sister is just an airhead and that Michael doesn't want a smart girlfriend, which is dumb. Lisa is an unreliable narrator. This is her film, her story, and she's gonna frame it in a way where she's the heroine. But just imagine the tone of the movie if Taffy had been the protagonist. Your mom remarries very quickly after meeting the guy, you have a new stepsister tortured by grief. First, your mom disappears, then a guy from school is reported missing, your sister's friend cuts off your boyfriend's P-tube in front of you, then your sister commits suicide and sets part of your home on fire. Bitchin'. And you end up finding out that your mom was killed in your sister's bedroom. That would definitely not be a comedy. And you can see the horror of the moment in the scene reminiscent of Stephen King's Carrie. She is terrified. If you have studied anything related to film, you're probably a sucker for references in movies too, and this one has so many. It's like a candy shop for me. The story happens in 1989, and most of the comedic aspect of the movie is centered around parodying classic 80s coming-of-age teen comedies, in which our teenage protagonist makes the mental leap from child to adult. Lisa Frankenstein ticks off basically all the boxes. There's first experimentation with drugs and alcohol, needing to get deflowered as soon as possible or else.
but I don't want to die a virgin.
Having your first crush or relationship, exploring your sexuality in private, changing your look, or developing a new identity, and the list goes on. It also often uses some of those classic dumb coincidences like Lisa's dad seeing the news about the lightning strike at the cemetery just as the conversation with the family ends, Michael Trent's house front door being open for Lisa to come in at the worst moment, and the most camp coincidence of them all, the cute twink zombie has only come back because of you and helps you kill off all the people you hate at the moment. About the movies that directly inspired the writing of the script, Diablo Cody actually mentioned a bunch. Starting off from the year 1920, more than 100 years ago, we've got The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a German silent horror film about a crazy hypnotist who uses a brainwashed somnambulist to commit murders. Roger Ebert, an American critic, called it arguably the first true horror film, and reviewer Danny Peary called it cinema's first cult film. This movie has inspired countless other films, but most importantly to me, Tim Burton's early works such as Vincent, Beetlejuice, his clay animated movies, and Edward Scissorhands, released in 1990. R.I.P. Lisa Frankenstein, you would have loved Edward Scissorhands.
The creature in Lisa Frankenstein is a direct descendant of Edward and is sort of deeply misunderstood and yet terribly romantic.
In a 2015 essay about the use of German expressionism in Burton's films, author Kunze wrote that Burton appropriates the German expressionist style and fuses it with the Hollywood aesthetic that demands clean and tidy stories with happy endings. While Lisa Frankenstein isn't exactly the most tidy and has more elements of a slasher movie, it does have a very optimistic tone and a happy ending, and similar to Burton's movies, it doesn't portray death as the end, but as a continuation, an opportunity to evolve and maybe heal. Many movies have been made based on or inspired by the original novel by Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, but the one that influenced Diablo Cody was Bride of Frankenstein from 1935, which was the sequel to the movie Frankenstein from 1931. In The Bride of Frankenstein, as the title states, a woman is created just for the creature. In this movie, the iconic striped Marge Simpson hair was first introduced, and a hairdo with a similar form can be seen worn by Lisa in the dream sequence. In 1975, the iconic The Rocky Horror Picture Show was released, which, according to my parents, was my favorite movie when I was little. So you can imagine how I turned out. I really want to believe that Lisa's stepmother is called Janet because of this.
I've one thing to say, and that's damn it, Janet, I love you.
Damn it! Janet!
The last movie that the screenwriter mentions is John Hughes' Weird Science from 1985, about two nerdy teenage boys that, by hooking electrodes to a doll and hacking into a government computer system for more power, create Lisa, the perfect woman, who also has shape-shifting powers, as any perfect woman does. She shows them how to interact with girls and helps them gain confidence. Similarly, in Lisa Frankenstein, as soon as the creature appears, Lisa starts gaining confidence, expressing herself through clothing, makeup, and being a lot less shy.
I haven't said this many words in a row in forever. Are you going to talk?
In one of her interviews, Zelda mentioned that to set the tone of the movie visually, she leaned into Spanish director Pedro Almodóvar's use of color, and she specifically mentioned the film Tie Me Up, Tie Me Down from 1989, which apparently uses the color red in a way that she loved. Because of that, in Lisa Frankenstein, they used it a lot in the set design, like in the lockers of the high school, which were actually that color when they found the location to film. Like, they didn't have to paint them, which is crazy. For the lighting of the movie, the director mentions that she was inspired by the 1981 movie American Werewolf in London, which had kind of aquamarine blue highlights in the nighttime scenes. There's also the 1992 film Death Becomes Her, which was apparently very informative to get the comedic tone right and helped shoot the violent scenes in Lisa Frankenstein.
You know, depending on how you shoot, violence can either be funny or incredibly harrowing, and I tried to lean towards that 80s and early 90s kind of camp violence.
The costume designer for Lisa Frankenstein was Megan McLaughlin. In an interview by Fangoria.com, Megan stated that a few of Lisa's costumes are from her own clothes that she wore growing up in the 80s, like the autumn-colored button-down at the gravesite. But when Lisa starts gaining confidence, her style quickly changes. Megan stated, "Winona Ryder is a huge influence for me in that period, and we were absolutely inspired by her costumes in Beetlejuice and Heathers." I had taken a screenshot from Heathers of Winona in a grey top with a black skirt with suspenders, and that inspired one of Lisa's looks, but we had to leave the suspenders hanging for movement. I also looked at movies like Say Anything and Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. I am so glad that she mentioned Heathers from 1989 because all I could think about while watching Lisa Frankenstein was how much it reminded me of Heathers, which is a dark comedy about a girl named Veronica who's in a clique in high school with 3 popular girls, all named Heather. When a new guy appears at school, Veronica develops a relationship with him but quickly realizes that he's kinda effed up as he starts murdering popular students and staging their deaths as suicides. The screenwriter Daniel Waters apparently intended the film to contrast the optimism in the teen movies of the period, particularly those written by John Hughes, by portraying high school through a cynical and darkly satirical lens. I may be wrong, but I feel like Diablo Cody's ethos when writing high school movies is similar. For the character of the creature, Megan said that the references were Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin, and as you probably already know, Mr. Sprouse worked with a mime to make sure his quiet character actually showed personality. So they basically leaned a bit into slapstick, which was a way of performing or acting often used in silent films that involved exaggerated movements to create comedy, often including intentional or accidental violence. Kind of perfect for a zombie character. Apart from these films specifically mentioned by the screenwriter and the director, there are some more movie references which I think should be taken into consideration as well, such as A Trip to the Moon, a silent French film which is directly shown in the film's dream sequence, and that is referenced a few times throughout the movie, like in the drawing in Lisa's closet, or in the cute animation used to not have to show us the creature with Michael Trent's recently stitched on P-tube. And I'm thankful for that. Why is that film referenced so frequently though? The film shows, as you probably guessed, A Trip to the Moon. The movie has gorgeous set design and, although rudimentary, some lovely practical effects that make the film's world totally magical, giving the moon and the stars human-like qualities like faces and emotions. As you know, the actual first trip to the moon occurred in 1969. Which was 67 years after this film was made. Lisa Frankenstein is set in 1989, only 20 years after the moon landing, but doesn't show footage of that trip though. It shows the romanticized 1902 version of the trip to the moon, and while it makes more sense since Lisa loves silent movies...
What kind of movies did he direct?
Silence. Okay, but be quiet.
I feel like it also signals to her tendency to romanticize the past and her vivid imagination. I mean, she talks to tombstones. Of course she loves a black and white version of an emotive moon. A film that I haven't seen anyone mention who is involved in the production of Lisa Frankenstein is An Andalusian Dog from 1929 by Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dalí. That, to me at least, very clearly inspired the dream sequence. I mean, it literally portrays the randomness and creepiness of dreams and nightmares, so... How could I not start this part of the video with Frankenstein by Mary Shelley? Originally published in 1818, the story follows Victor Frankenstein, a young scientist that manages to create a sapient creature made up of different body parts who he ends up abandoning when he realizes that he's come too close to playing God. Yes, I did reread the book so I could write this part in a more informed manner, and yes, I am an intellectual. Also another yes, this will contain spoilers for Frankenstein the novel. The main premise of the book is that those who seek to go beyond nature will perish victims of their own vanity. In the copy that I own, the prologue mentions that the man who surpasses the limits of his humanity and tries to emulate God has to endure the tragic consequences of his actions. And that's what Victor does. After he fearfully abandons the creature as soon as he sees that it's come to life, his monster has to learn everything all by himself and quickly realizes that everyone is scared of him and that he will never be able to form a bond with a human being. Because of this, and seeing the complete lack of care that Victor has for him, he slowly becomes more and more of a monster and starts killing Victor's loved ones. In Lisa Frankenstein, Lisa invokes the creature almost unwillingly, but nevertheless very quickly accepts him for how he is, amputated body parts and all. This story takes on a romantic and optimistic approach compared to the disgrace and devastation that envelops the original Frankenstein. In Lisa Frankenstein, the creature also goes on a killing spree, but it's not out of vengeance. It's out of love. Aww. He also wants to become worthy of Lisa, and to become the perfect complete man, he needs somebody else's body parts, so the killings are extra convenient. While Lisa does endure the tragic consequences of her actions, ruining her dad and sister's life, being followed by the police, and having to kill herself, Lisa's character is so strange and unhinged that more than confronting the consequences of her actions, The end just feels like she's meeting her destiny. It's truly the weirdest yet happiest happily ever after I've seen in a long time, seeing her lay there undead with the creature reading her a romantic poem. And so I think it's interesting how it completely subverts the message of the original Frankenstein while referencing it so obviously. I think it's also important to mention that just like Lisa, Victor Frankenstein is also an unreliable narrator who frames the story in a way that will make him look like the victim. In the book, the captain of a ship is the one who transcribes Victor's story, and by the end he tells us, Victor corrected and augmented my notes in many places, but mainly he tried to give life and force to the conversations he had with his enemy. Since you have taken some notes, he said, I would not want the story to pass mutilated to posterity. Going back to the romantic elements of the movie, it also reminded me so much of Romeo and Juliet by William Shakespeare, a tragedy about the romance between two young Italians from feuding families. Although they are supposed to be sworn enemies, they fall in love. In very dramatic, tragic fashion though, when Juliet fakes her death so she can run away with Romeo, Romeo believes she's actually dead and ends up drinking poison and dies. Then Juliet sees Romeo dead and kills herself with his dagger. This could all have been avoided with basic communication, guys. Come on. In Lisa Frankenstein, the tragedy from the very start is death itself. Although the creature is a zombie, he can't ever really be the human lover he wants to be for Lisa unless he gets all his body parts, which he has to kill people for, which means that the police will catch them both and they won't be able to have a happily ever after. The romance is basically doomed from the start, but Lisa is so passionate that she kills herself to potentially become undead too, because as she writes in her note, death is temporary, I will love you forever. The only words spoken out loud by Mr. Cole Sprouse in the whole movie are from a poem called To Mary, written by Percy Bysshe Shelley, husband of Frankenstein's writer Mary Shelley. While Lisa is wrapped up in bandages and lying across the creature's lap, he comforts her by reading to her from a book of Percy's poems that can be seen at the start of the movie placed on the creature's tombstone. The poem is dedicated to Mary by her husband, and in it he wishes her beloved was with him, writing, "O Mary dear, that you were here. Mary dear, come to me soon. I am not well whilst thou art far, as sunset to the sphered moon, as twilight to the western star, thou, beloved, art to me." In the last verse of the poem, though, the writer lets us know that Mary is finally near. "O Mary dear, that you are here, the castle echo whispers, here." One of my favorite parts of the ending of the film is that just as the creature reads the last word of the poem and says here, Lisa opens her eyes, or her eye sockets, hinting at the fact that maybe that's the exact moment when Lisa fully comes back from the dead, and I love that we get to see that little moment.
But now that it ends, let's be friends and not.
There should be a conclusions part here, I guess, but my only conclusion is that the more I research this movie, the more I love it. There's just something about the film that speaks to me on a very deep level, and I don't know what it is exactly. Maybe it's the story itself, or that combined with the visual style, or the fact that it very clearly has the perspective of the female gaze, since the writer, the director, the composer, and the costume designer are all women. It's probably all of the above. All I can say is that although it's cheesy, I just feel like seen by this movie, and it makes me so happy every time. I hope that if it is in this movie, that you have or find a movie or a book or whatever that makes you feel seen too, because it's the best feeling. But anyways, this is the end of the video. There are so many more things I could talk about in more detail, but I think it's long enough. I hope I made you like this movie at least a little more. Thank you for watching, and I hope to make more videos about girly horror movies soon. Happy spooky season, everyone.